All right. Well, thank you, Jeff, so much for joining me
Yeah.
today. I am Angela Gray, the founder and chairman of Rick's Market Foundation, and so excited to announce that we have selected you as our Black Philanthropist for 2024. So, if you don't mind, can you just give us a brief introduction?
Yeah, and thank you, Angela. It's an honor to be here and finally to do this. But my name is Jeff Robbins. I'm the executive director at Clean Air NC. I've been at Clean Air for a little over 2 years, celebrated my 2 year anniversary at the beginning of September. And yeah, I'm in this space after 29 years in corporate marketing and operations. So.
All right. So one of the reasons we selected you is because of the partnership between our organizations. We know that the climate is impacted by food, and food also impacts the climate. So it's so important that we work to keep our earth, healthy so that it can provide for us, and that we also need to make sure that we are good stewards of it as well. So
Right.
I have a couple of questions. So for Black philanthropy, my first question is, Merriam-Webster defines philanthropy as goodwill to fellow members of the human race, an
Mhm.
act or gift done or made for humanitarian purposes, an organization distributing or supported by funds set aside for humanitarian purposes. After hearing this, how do you think Black philanthropy is similar or different from the definition I read?
Uh, that's a great question. And I think the first thing that kind of jumps out to me when we make the distinction about Black philanthropy is it doesn't always revolve around money and or the transfer or giving of gifts of money. And I think the historical context of where Black philanthropy started, and I always think about uh, a story my dad and my uncle told me about um, the Mason Network and how that was one of the first organizations that my grandfather, my great grandfather, my uncle, all were Masons. And that was the idea of helping one another based on that affiliation, right?
Mhm.
And so philanthropy to me is about helping or creating empowerment through acts of kindness, acts of uplifting, or providing guidance, support, or mentoring, right? And I think that is the major difference. I think now what we're starting to see is that Black philanthropy is incorporating those dollars because the base of Black wealth is growing, right? And there are organizations that have generational wealth that I think about the Knight Foundation, right, as a classic example. These are Black philanthropic organizations that have that cultural nuance that started under the premise of being able to help folks, and then through their own generational wealth building, has kind of created that intersectionality between that gift of guidance to the gift of support for sustainability. And I mean sustainability in the sense of being able to sustain organizations outside of their normal flow or normal relationship. So I think Black philanthropy to me has been kind of a force of positive change in Black community. And that's one of the reasons that drew me to this space, especially working in climate, is the ability to work with community to then see other folks that are working at a level of help to expand the traditional meaning and highlights of Black philanthropy to not just include that level of support, but to now to add a financial component to it. And I think seeing that transition over my lifespan has been pretty phenomenal.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I think about it.
All right. Thanks. All right. My second question is, many people think of philanthropists as people who make large cash donations. Even
Mhm.
now, Black-led, Black benefiting U.S. organizations receive less than 2% of philanthropic dollars. How do you think Black philanthropy has helped fill this void?
Well, I think it's that level of connectedness that is just by nature part of the Black community, and it's filling a critical role right now in a lot of spaces as we look at the money that was channeled down from the Biden-Harris administration going through organizations like the Deep South that created a phenomenal funding mechanism of support. But really, it's predicated on that community-driven level of support first that, prioritizes those local grassroots. And that's the thing that I love about Rick's Market and some of the other organizations that we partner with in the historic West End, like Soul Nation and HWEP and organizations like that, that are really channeling those Black philanthropy dollars to the community. I think the other thing that I like in, working with Charles Thomas at the Knight Foundation is the flexibility that, we receive in terms of Black donors. They're a lot more flexible in their funding structures. Charles was really, it was an imperative that we focus on businesses that can then touch community in a lot of the things that we're doing with our partnership with the city to bring community change grant dollars to the corridors of opportunity, specifically the Beatties Ford corridor. And I think the other component I think about is just that level of understanding. Black philanthropists possess a deep understanding of some of the unique challenges that face our communities. And that's a little bit of a difference between when you look at other um, philanthropic organizations that are, traditional, predominantly white institutions that are thankfully taking an interest in really and oftentimes taking their leads from Black philanthropy. And then the other part is, we network, right? There's just a fostering of connectivity between donors, organizations, and community leaders that really is driving the development of these networks of support and collaboration. So it's kind of phenomenal to see and be actually working here because I never really understood how the inner workings of this work, but that's kind of what I'm seeing and feeling.
All right, thanks. So, my third question is the Greek root of philanthropy means may be literally translated as loving people. Can
Yeah.
you share an example of Black philanthropy that doesn't involve a cash donation?
Yeah, I think about, you hear the term giving back all the time, right? And especially in the Black community. And, um, my grandmother worked for the Urban League in Chicago, where it was that organization's kind of base of foundation. Um, and it was really predicated on mentorship and guidance because the Urban League was created to create jobs for Black folks that were being overlooked or not given opportunities, that were educated. When you think about how the HBCU model drove Black professionalism across the decades. And so I look at mentorship and guidance as one of those foundational things. And I think about our little triangle. Angela, you're part of CMCL. We've had conversations about Rick's Market. I, made introductions. I introduced Joy Mayo from Tree Charlotte to you in terms of what she's doing in transforming nations forward in hopes of creating an opportunity. It was through that guidance and relationship and mentoring, us mentoring each other, right? Letting each other know what the needs are, trading ideas and collaborating on solutions is what really creates that groundswell of effect. So I always give back through mentoring and provide guidance and really taking the time to spend, um, you know, not necessarily dollars. And people say time is money. I never think of it in that way, but we oftentimes minimize just having a conversation, just providing mentoring, just providing guidance or an idea that can then foster or ignite that switch to get something going and create that change.
Yeah. And just to add, I know when you were talking, I thought about my mom and how often she would talk about, the knowledge that was passed down to her and how important it was that she share information with us so
Yeah,
that we could keep it going. And I think sometimes we do forget like the wealth of knowledge we just possess that sometimes we don't think, it's our job to share that so that others, coming behind us don't have to go through the struggles we went through.
exactly. Yeah, that's a great point.
All
So,
right. So my next question is, even though the term Black philanthropy has only been around for a couple of decades, the practice has its origins in African traditions and practices. What
mhm.
are your origins in Black philanthropy?
Well, it's kind of like what I think about is, you know, the stories that I kind of alluded to earlier. Um, my dad worked on the railroads in Chicago as a Pullman porter, and um, he would tell me stories about oftentimes he was low on funds, and sometimes it was a long distance train, and they had to you know go somewhere and find places to stay, and going back through you know trying to figure out what to do and having that conversation and with his father and saying, hey, I know a mason in this city, give this person a call, right?
Mhm.
And I think the origin of that really stems from our African roots and culture, right? Of sharing cooperation and collective responsibility, right? And hearing the stories about the Depression, and my dad raised chickens, right? And every Sunday, his mom would say, hey, um, prepare a couple of chickens for dinner, but also prepare some for the neighbors on both sides across the street and in back, right? And it's that mutual aid that societies have built based on the traditions of what tribal folks did back in the day to help each other grow crops or bring crops in or whatever that looks like, right? And I think that's a big part of it. I grew up in the Episcopal Church on the south side of Chicago, where I learned that churches were the first financial institutions because Black folks couldn't open up bank accounts.
Mhm.
So I opened up my first bank account when I was 6 years old and had
Wow.
that until I was a senior in high school. And that was able to help me survive through contributions that the church did in terms of programs and, scholarship fundraisers and things of that nature. So seeing these examples of how you're supposed to help, how the transition or the transfer of money isn't the imperative, but becomes a part of it through those informal networks that you cultivate over the years of living.
Right.
And so I have those stories in the back of my mind, and those are the things that kind of keep me grounded in terms of why I'm in this space and why I do what I do, and why even as a nonprofit, we also help through guidance, support, even donations at times, because the more you give, the more you get back. We know that as a proverb, right?
Right.
So
All right.
that's kind of what I think about it.
Okay. And then my last question is, well, first, thank you so much for giving of your
Sure.
time, talents, and treasures. What advice do you have for future generations regarding Black philanthropy?
Yeah. I think the first thing that I always say and I always tell people is remember where you came from, right? Embrace that legacy and understand the rich history of how Black folks got here, how we learned how to survive through some of the darkest, most terrible times in our history, and how we are really moving ahead in terms of being able to help one another and really make change in this world that carves out space for us as a people. I think the other thing is diversifying that support, right? When you're young, you don't have the ability to, so that you should I tell young folks, hey, you don't necessarily have to make a donation of money, but you can donate your time, right? And community service is important. I think support of Black-led organizations is important. We personally, I believe in diversity, but when you have an organization that um, believes in having diverse individuals from multiple communities that have similar backgrounds, right? The plight of Hispanic folks, the plight of Asian people that have immigrated here. We all got here through different means, but we're here now, and we all need to be a part of the solutions that create what does that giving model look like? Patience and persistence. We know things don't come easy. The road is often filled with all kinds of challenges. So that's the other thing that I was saying. The final thing is invest in that next generation because children are the future, and if we don't, you know, lay the breadcrumb trail down and give them guidance and support on how to stay in the fight, um, yeah, we'll be paying for that down the road. So we have to kind of keep that in mind. So,
Well, once again, thank you so much,
well,
not just for this interview, but for all you do for the community.